Welcome back to Political Spirits, and I'm your host, Franklin Rye. We still stand for the proposition that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk. Compromise is not a requirement. If those discussions result in us changing or even abandoning our positions, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine too. We just need to talk to each other. In that way, we can unify through speech. And if the discussion becomes a bit heated, at the end of the night, we should still be able to split up the bar tab and be on our way. So what are we going to talk about this week? We've talked in the past about the outrageous denials of due process on college campuses to students accused of sexual misconduct, including ridiculous circumstances like the college which named as a representative for the accuser in the proceeding the spouse of the person named as the judge in the same proceeding. And we've talked about some of the strong rebukes that have been administered by the courts against colleges engaging in such conduct. In that respect, another example of such a rebuke recently occurred. But what makes it particularly interesting is who administered the rebuke. The Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals recently held against Purdue University. The conduct of Purdue is just as outrageous as some of the conduct of other universities I've talked about. For example, failure to provide to the accused the evidence which was used to determine his guilt. Failure to allow cross-examination of the accuser, because the accuser didn't even testify in the proceeding. In fact, the accuser wasn't even required to submit a sworn statement. Finally, the accused wasn't even allowed to present evidence or witnesses. The campus committee found the accused guilty of groping the accuser while she slept and suspended the accused from college for a year. As a result, he lost his Navy ROTC scholarship and was expelled from the ROTC program. The appellate decision of the Seventh Circuit in the case of Doe versus Purdue University was issued by a panel of judges consisting entirely of women, and the decision was unanimous. Incredibly, the reason why the case was even before the appellate court is because the trial court dismissed the lawsuit against Purdue. The appellate court reinstated it, allowing the plaintiff, the accused, to move forward with his case against Purdue University. The appellate court noted that the college's treatment of the case, quote, fell short of what even a high school must provide to a student facing days-long suspension, close quote. And most importantly, the appellate court held that the plaintiff must be given a chance to make his case that the college's treatment of him was a violation of Title IX. The Seventh Circuit held that the accused raised sufficient allegations to make a case that he was denied educational benefits on the basis of his sex, that he was treated the way he was treated because he was a male. Granted, there's no guarantee that he'll be successful in making that case at trial. But the fact that the case was reinstated and he'll be given the chance is huge. Incidentally, I predict it won't go to trial. I predict Purdue University will settle, but we'll see, and I'll give you updates as the case moves forward. Now, I said this case was interesting because of who administered the rebuke to the university. The opinion was written by Judge Amy Coney Barrett, the judge who is widely believed to be the most likely to be nominated to the Supreme Court by President Trump if and when there's another opening on the Supreme Court. Perhaps the college is running roughshod over the constitutional rights of the accused on their campuses should keep that in mind. Next topic. Wage pressure washing. This is a brief subject I wanted to mention in light of a conversation I had recently. We've talked many times in prior episodes about the fact that illegal immigration holds down the wages of low-skill and unskilled U.S. citizens and U.S. residents who are here legally. In light of that, I wanted to talk about a brief conversation I had with the guy who I hired to pressure wash my driveway, sidewalk, and back patio. I've used him for years. His price hasn't changed for years. I wouldn't call it low, but I don't think it's outrageous either. I keep using him because, frankly, he does an absolutely top-notch job. He's very thorough. He never cuts any corners. He's there when he says he will be. He usually finishes on time, and there's not a bit of dirt left anywhere. After his latest session, I asked him how things were going, and he responded that, frankly, they were tough. He explained that he has a base of customers like me who've been with him for years, but in competing for new customers, he's being undercut on price to an extent that leaves him absolutely dumbfounded. He says that they're quoting prices that he hasn't charged in the last 15 years. Think about that. 15 years. Now, this is a solo small businessman. Who's undercutting him? I can't be sure, but my suspicion is that there's a very good chance that it's illegal immigrants. It doesn't cost much to buy a basic pressure washer, especially if you can find one used. I wouldn't be at all surprised if illegal immigrants with dramatically lower wage expectations are running pressure cleaning businesses at prices a fraction of which the market would otherwise bear. You may say to yourself, why is that a problem? I like to get affordable services at my house. But what price are we actually paying as a society if that is in fact what is happening? I'll talk more about this in future episodes, but we should all really think about what is happening in what is supposed to be a free market. Why have wages stagnated for so long? There are certainly multiple reasons, but at the bottom end of the economic spectrum, it's pretty clear that illegal immigration is a huge part of the problem. Next topic. The latest Democratic polls. Have you seen what's happening in the race for the Democratic presidential nomination? I said before it's too early to be relying on the polls for the general election matchup. And I said before that it's way too early to be declaring Joe Biden the winner in the primaries. I suspected there was a good chance he would fade, and there is at least some indication that may be what's happening. The latest Quinnipiac poll is eye-opening. It shows Joe Biden with 22%, only 2% ahead of Kamala Harris at 20%. Behind her, Warren and Sanders are also neck and neck at 14% and 13% respectively. The biggest loser? Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg, who was previously looking like he was on the verge of moving up to compete with those near the top of the polls, is now down at only 4%. That's a serious collapse. Now, it's pretty obvious that the reason for Biden's drop and Harris's rise is their respective performances in the last Democratic debate. Biden looked weak, timid, and fairly unimpressive in his presentation. Conversely, Harris looked commanding. Will that continue? We'll have to wait and see, but as I've said before, I have doubts that Biden can stay at the top for the long run. With regard to Harris's long-term potential, I've said for quite some time that she should be considered as one of the most likely to win the nomination. However, she's moved so far to the left in the primaries that just like many of her colleagues, I really believe she would have a hard time beating Donald Trump unless we go into a recession. So what about Buttigieg? What happened? Well, the obvious answer is his collapse is blowback from his handling of the police shooting in South Bend. But he's fallen so far you have to ask whether it's something more. And I believe it was. He was basically one of those media darlings that catches on for part of the primary. The Democrats started to throw their hopes into his bucket. After all, he does have a pretty good story to tell, and he's certainly intelligent and well-spoken. But in the end, it couldn't last. He's a mayor of a very small city. As I've noted, I live in the relatively small town of Parkland in South Florida, and even though South Bend, where Buttigieg is mayor, is a city rather than a town, it's only about 3 times the size of the relatively small town in which I live. There is simply no way it's reasonable to expect that the mayor of such a small city could move straight to the presidency of the most powerful nation in the history of the planet. In the end, I think the electorate knows that. I think even the Democrat electorate knows that. And when the bloom started to fall off the rose of Buttigieg's candidacy, with his handling of the police shooting in South Bend, I think Democrats started to look elsewhere. It's possible he could come back, but I wouldn't bet on it. Next topic. playing for the reaction. Did you watch the July 4th celebrations in Washington, D.C.? I did. Did you enjoy the media going nearly apoplectic in the reaction to Trump's statements in advance of the celebration? I certainly did. Over the last couple of years, I've had a hard time understanding on occasion why President Trump would say certain things. But over time, I've come to realize something. Most of the time, he's not playing for the action, he's playing for the reaction. Think about it. He says he wants tanks as part of the celebration in D.C. The vision the media and huge numbers of Democrats, including those running for the Democrat nomination, have is that the president is going to have M1 tanks rolling down the streets of Washington, D.C. That fits their portrayal of President Trump as some sort of fascist dictator, so they freak out about it. From CNN to MSNBC to the major networks, the hand-wringing commenced, and they had no problem finding Democrat candidates for the nomination and other Democrat members of Congress to join them in their over-the-top criticism of the president's proposed celebration. Then, in the run-up to the event, they made sure to make repeated negative predictions about the weather and the attendance. MSNBC and the networks advised that they would not carry the event live. Keep in mind that this was a celebration that President Trump was describing as a, quote, salute to America, close quote. He announced that it would be a celebration of our men in uniform, of the accomplishments of the American military. So what happened? The mall was filled to capacity around the reflecting pool starting from the base of the Lincoln Memorial. There was some rain, but in the end the weather cleared enough for the events. The tanks weren't M1 Abrams tanks rolling down the streets of Washington, D.C., but rather two M1 Abrams tanks towed into town on trailers and placed in stationary positions on display, and two Bradley fighting vehicles towed into town and placed in stationary vehicles on display as well. Then President Trump delivered a speech focusing on the greatness of our country, delving into the history of our founding and the strength and successes of our military forces, separately celebrating each branch in conjunction with playing the service songs or hymns of each one of those branches, punctuated by multiple flyovers of military aircraft representing each of the services. The speech certainly helped President Trump politically, but its content was in no way political. In the end, President Trump came across in an extremely positive way, much more positively, in fact, than he would have come across if he hadn't been so severely criticized in advance of the event. He was certainly playing to his base, which loves patriotic displays, but he was also playing for the reaction. As the media and much of the Democratic Party attacked him, they ended up looking like they opposed celebrating Independence Day. President Trump ended up coming across like the President Thomas J. Whitmore from the movie Independence Day, who gives that moving speech we've watched so many times. And virtually the entire Democratic Party and the media came across like the Weasley Secretary of Defense who gets fired in the movie Independence Day. All because they reacted as I suspect the president expected them to react. How are independent voters going to see this exchange? I think I know. Have Democrats and the media forgotten that celebrations like this occur on a smaller scale every year all around the country? In South Florida over the years, there have been major air shows over the beaches of Fort Lauderdale and Miami with huge displays of aircraft, including the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds, the U.S. Navy Blue Angels, and other military might. Locals and tourists flock to them. They don't sit around wringing their hands about whether it's too much, whether it's xenophobic or warmongering. They're proud of their country. They're proud of their military. And they show up by the thousands at every show. Action. President Trump announces a salute to America. Reaction. Democratic candidates, Democrat members of Congress, and the media roundly criticize it, and they come off looking like they oppose celebrating Independence Day and are ashamed of America. Trump played for the reaction, and he won. Next topic. Colossus 2.0. Let's talk for a bit now about a poem, one that we've all heard but probably have misunderstood its history. That poem is called The New Colossus. It was written as a gift to the fundraiser for the construction of a pedestal for the Statue of Liberty, and it was read at the opening of that fundraising exhibition in 1883. The statue was erected on the pedestal in 1886. Most people assume that the poem was present on the pedestal at that time. It wasn't. Not until an effort was launched to have the poem displayed on the pedestal did momentum gain for such a move, and not until 1903 was the poem actually displayed at the pedestal on its inner wall. You may remember the confrontation the insufferable Jim Acosta had with White House aide Stephen Miller, when Acosta seemed to be taking the position that the words of the poem constituted some sort of historical governing policy for the United States, and Miller reminded him that the poem wasn't even written when the statue was constructed. So what exactly are the words of the poem? I'll give it my best shot at reciting them. Quote, "Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land, here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with the torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome, her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep ancient lands your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." Close quote. So it's really just the end of the poem that you typically hear, the part about huddled masses and breathing free. Much of the earlier part of it doesn't make sense to us because we don't realize that when the poem was written, New York and Brooklyn were two separate cities, which explains the reference to twin cities. So why do I bring this up? Because notwithstanding the protestations of people like Jim Acosta, our immigration policies are not governed by a poem written after the Statue of Liberty was constructed, and at a time when we were struggling to fill the country with sufficient residents to build our economic strength. Notwithstanding the fact that it doesn't bind us, that doesn't stop immigration activists from contending it does. So I'd like to propose an updating of the poem, something that recognizes our current situation, the fact that we're dramatically more populous than we were near the end of the 19th century, and is in keeping with my immigration views, which generally track with those of President Trump. So here goes. The New Colossus 2.0. Not like de Blasio, that blowhard giant famous in his own brain, with dangling limbs and a politician's outstretched hands, here at the gates where our congested, overpriced real estate stands, a mighty woman with a torch, but probably wishing she had concealed carry at hand, and her name, Mother of Citizens. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome, but with her eagle eyes command a vetting for all who wish to live between the seas. For she knows that we are a government of, for, and by the people, and the people are our citizens, and will do what's best for them. So we want those which our economy lacks, and those who can carry their families on their backs, not take from the government the funds of the citizens. Keep your illegal immigrants, she cries, a full-throated cry, not with silent lips, for she is a confident American woman who wants those who obey our laws, including our immigration laws. Give me your engineers, your entrepreneurs, your doctors and nurses, all who are in short supply. Send me your farm workers, too, because we know the need will arise. And we tell you how many, no rushing the border, no overstays, or we'll ban you forever. That's the price you'll pay. That's the vision we offer to you of the globe and our citizens all, including our poorest who need higher wages most of all. And with immigration controlled and the light of my torch, the wisdom of that vision will be seen from coast to coast. Close quote. And I'll be back next week with another episode of Political Spirits, heard from coast to coast. So please join me and tell your friends about Political Spirits, and follow me on Twitter @FranklinRye. This is Franklin Rye. Thank you for listening.